Hello, pattern readers. I'm back, and it's only been a couple of weeks this time, not a couple of months, so I'm going to count that as a win. And I have just gotten through with the first ever WoTCon 2022, and as part of that experience, Amazon released two never before seen scenes from season 1 of the Wheel of Time TV show. And both of those are from the very first episode. They're deleted scenes. One of those deleted scenes has now been released to the public. So I wanted to talk about that one in detail. And I'm going to tie it into my experience at WoTCon so I can share some of that with you as well. I am going to keep this video safe to watch in terms of spoilers, so as long as you've seen season 1 of the show, you should be good to watch this video. So we start with this new establishing shot of misty mountains, really very lovely, and then it moves into a shot which did make it into the episode, a wide shot of the women's circle walking with mountains in the background. We then get a shot of the women's circle walking across a stone bridge, which we have seen in another part of the episode later with Nynaeve and Egwene. And then we have a few shots which are really here, again, to establish that they're moving into this cave where their ritual will take place, but also the shots themselves are very emblematic and evocative of certain symbols that are relevant in the series. So for instance, here in the shape of the cave, we can see something that will be emblematic of an important symbol to the Aes Sedai, the flame of Tar Valon. When we see Egwene in the pool, we see she's very serene. She's moving in a circular motion. Lots of sort of circular imagery throughout a lot of these shots. All of the dialogue in this scene comes from Nynaeve. She's giving a little speech, which is part of the ceremony, talking about how in this world, women must be all things. And she runs through a whole list of those qualities that women are expected to be. While Nynaeve is giving this monologue, we see the women of the women's circle in turn pouring paint of different colors into the pool. Those of us who have read the books and know a little bit more about the 7 Ajas of the Aes Sedai will recognize that there are direct parallels being played out here. Now, if you've only seen the show and you haven't read the books, then you're not going to know as much about the Ajas at this point. But I don't really consider it to be a spoiler to talk about what the different Ajas represent. It's simply a matter of the story hasn't gotten around to filling us in on those details yet. And it's the same in the books, to be honest. If you'd only read through the first book or two in the series, you would not really have full knowledge of what the different Ajas are really about, because it takes a while to really be introduced to different members of all of the Ajas. But it's clear that in this ritual, the different colors symbolize different qualities that women are expected to have, and that those are not accidental, that there are definitely parallels or links, if we go back in history far enough, with the things that the different Ajas represent as well. And my guess would be that if you were to ask the women who are performing the ritual in this scene, if they know about that link or know about the history of how that link came about with their ritual and the Aes Sedai, they wouldn't know. But that, to me, is extremely emblematic of a major theme in the books, which is that there are things that pass through time and space, and they evolve and change. So we don't necessarily recognize where all of our myths and legends came from and what they might have originally meant. Things change even over much shorter periods of time, let alone the amount of time we're talking about here. So to me, it makes perfect sense that there would be that linkage in the past between women's rituals and Aes Sedai, and that those links wouldn't necessarily be recognized. So to start off with, Nynaeve mentions strength, and we see that green is the first color that is poured into the pool. So I think that one is a fairly direct parallel, green being the battle Aja, the one that prepares for facing the shadow in the last battle. And then we have wisdom, which is coming in the form of brown, very sensible there, since browns favor knowledge and study. And then we have willingness to use that wisdom for good. And we see the color blue then. So blues are apparently, again, this is where things are a bit changed, perhaps. We don't know exactly how the blues would describe themselves because we haven't actually heard them describe that yet. But we've heard the reds describe them as spies, so that's kind of interesting. We've certainly seen Moiraine engage in some of that kind of spy work herself. But if we look at like what Moraine is up to and her crusade, her mission to find out and help the Dragon Reborn, I think that might give us a little bit of an idea of what she sees her focus as. So that is a connection that might be explored a little bit more as we find out more about the Blue Aja. Patience goes to the Gray, and the Gray Aja are known as mediators, political negotiators, people who help different factions come to agreement. And then the Sense to act, and that one goes to the White Aja, which are known for their focus on the pursuit of logic. Here's where things definitely go a little bit off script in terms of how we connect directly to the Ajas. So the yellow goes in when Nynaeve is talking about the gift of creation, the ability to give life. Now, what do the yellows do? That's one we've actually seen a little bit of. In episode 6, we see that Perrin is being treated by the yellow Aja when he is in recovery from his injuries he received from Eamon Valda, the White Cloak. So we know that yellows are involved with healing, and that is their main focus. And that's certainly not the same thing as giving life, but we can definitely see that there's some connection there, and it makes a little bit of sense to make that parallel. And then finally, Nynaeve puts in the red when she talks about taking life. And that is the one that probably would most differ from the way the red Aja would describe their mission. So the red Aja is one that we've definitely gotten to see a lot more of. And we've seen that their focus is on tracking down men who can channel and bringing them to what they would call justice, and seeing that those men are gentled and cannot touch the one power any longer. They certainly would not see what they're doing as taking life. If anything, they would focus on protecting the world from these men who can channel themselves. Men who can channel caused a catastrophic breaking of the world and led to a lot of death. And by neutralizing these men, the Red Aja certainly see themselves as protectors. And they're not directly taking lives. But if we go a little bit deeper, we have also learned how harmful being gentled can be to a man, and how many of them lose the will to live, end up dead as a result. So again, very different from the way they would describe themselves, but there's some connection there that we can draw. Again, I would just stress how important it is that this is not meant to be a direct parallel, but rather a way to show that there may have been this common history, common belief and understanding that would have led to both the creation of the Ajas and what they represent, and this ritual, which has probably been passed down for generation after generation, and isn't necessarily fully understood in the way that it was originally conceived. We then see Egwene submerge herself as the colors are spreading towards the center of the pool. And then after submerging, she reemerges in this shot that we have absolutely seen before in the first teaser trailer. And it's really an iconic shot. And we see this just really rapt look on Egwene's face and the strength of her purpose. So what are my overall thoughts on this scene, why they originally included it, why they ended up cutting it, and I guess what they should have done with it? So I think it's kind of complicated. I mean, for one thing, I think the scene itself is really beautiful, extremely evocative. There's a ton of foreshadowing in here, which I'm not even going to get into at this point because I don't want to get into spoilers. But there's so many beautiful things in this scene, especially coming from the perspective of a book reader that can really appreciate all those little details and subtleties there. And what role would it have served in the episode? It does fill in some gaps a little bit, right? So we get the scene following this where after Egwene goes through this part of the ritual, she apparently gets to dry off a little bit, her hair gets braided, and then she gets pushed into the river. So it's quite an involved ceremony. This fills in a little bit more of those pieces. And then another thing that it really adds to, of course, is a scene in episode 3, which is a flashback scene where we find out how Nynaeve survived the Trolloc attack. And we see her in that same pool there's a lot of more layers to that scene, something so horrific happening there when we've seen this same setting originally as such a sacred place. Gives a little bit more context even to the scene in the first episode where Nynaeve is cleaning the pool. So we really understand like why she was doing that, and that maybe that is not something that she does all the time. This was something really a special day and moment for their community. So of course, book reader that I am, would have loved to have had this scene. I can see how it connects to other things, and it just enriches some other scenes that we get later on. However, I also do understand why it didn't make it into the final episode. For one thing, if we're just looking at things from a purely time standpoint, and they certainly seem to have been doing that. I'll talk a little bit more about the merits of that, but they definitely were. If we had to choose between this scene that didn't make it in and the scene where Egwene is getting her hair braided and Nynaeve pushes her off into the river, I think there's a lot of reasons why that second scene had to be kept over this one. The braid and the significance of it is also extremely important, and that I think informs some later scenes in the season, especially the scene where Egwene's hair is unbound when the White Cloaks are really treating her in such a dehumanizing fashion. And then, the way we see maybe Nynaeve interact with her braid at certain moments as well. So that's really key. Egwene making her way down the river is a pretty important metaphor, probably even more important than the symbology that we had in this cave scene. There's just more action involved too, with her actually having to make her way down the river. That's the risky part of this ceremony. Again, between the two, I think it was a clear choice. Could they have done both? I could certainly see an argument for this scene being a little slower, which is a tough, thing to do early on in an episode when you're trying to draw people in. A lot of it is world building types of exposition, which are great to have, but you do have to be careful about not giving people too much. And then another aspect is that I think by including this scene, they would have been focusing a lot more on Nynaeve and Egwene, which is, I have no problem with that. I love these characters and I love that they got some additional focus, but it's a balancing act overall if they're trying to give us the idea that any of these 5 people could be the Dragon Reborn, but we don't want to overemphasize one or more characters too much. Maybe it would have been a little overemphasis on Egwene and Nynaeve so early on. So bottom line, I think that this amount of time, this is about, a little bit more than 2-minute scene, would have been wonderful to have, but if I could add any 2 minutes anywhere in the episode, I probably wouldn't pick that as the 2 minutes. I think there are other spots in the episode that might have needed a little bit more time more than this was needed. So ultimately, I'd love to have more time to play with in this episode and other episodes, but I can definitely agree with maybe not spending it this way. There could be other ways that would be even better to spend on. So that actually brings me to something that connects to WoTCon. So I was involved with the programming for WoTCon. I was the programming director. And so as part of that, I got to make a lot of decisions about what kind of content we would include for the panels, especially at this convention. And so that was a really wonderful experience. And most of all, it was really great to hear from people who attended the convention and how they experienced all of the content. And so that was really wonderful. One of the things that we opted to do in order to discuss the show, because it gets really super tricky when you want to discuss the show and you want to encourage interesting, constructive conversation, especially among people who may not agree about what they like and what they don't like about the show. So what we opted to do for our panels where we would break down and discuss each episode, we did them 2 at a time. So there was one panel for episodes 1 and 2, one for 3 and 4, and so on. So there were 4 panels that broke down the episodes. And rather than just doing, hey, what did you like about these episodes? What did you not like about the episodes? I wanted to focus it a little bit more. So what we ended up doing was what we called 5 minutes in heaven. And we played this game where it's like, okay, you can add 5 minutes to each of these episodes. Amazon's being a little bit more flexible with their run times, and they're giving you an extra 5 minutes to play with. So how would you add 5 minutes? What would you add? And why would that make a difference? How would that affect the episode overall? How could that make it better? And so I felt like I was really happy with the way that turned out as a constructive way to think about what worked really well in the episodes, what could have worked better, what could we have done. If we start getting into, hey, let's cut some stuff, that gets pretty negative pretty quick and not super helpful. So I'm more interested in what can we add rather than what should we take away. So just, for my part, talking about episode 1, where would I add 5 minutes? Our number one priority for adding some time would come at the end of the episode where Maureen has told everyone that they have to leave. One of them is the Dragon Reborn. And then it's very abruptly, they're off on their horses from that point. That was where I felt a little bit of like a pacing issue in the episode. Like that happened too quick at the end. And so if I were going to add any time to the episode, that would be my number one priority. I would want to make sure that the audience knows that Tam Althor and Egwene's parents, that they all have also heard that Maureen is telling them that one of them is the dragon. And I would just like someone to ask the question, how do you know that one of us is the dragon? Maureen doesn't even have to answer it because she might refuse to at that point and say, there's no time to explain. We've got to go. These Trollocs are coming after you. And maybe they would have to just trust her and go with her at that point. But I wanted someone to ask the question, and I wanted their parents to understand why they were leaving and not just be like, okay. So that was where I feel like time was most needed. And there were some other smaller priorities that I would have for adding time, including a little bit more context on Perrin and Layla, since we're adding in such a big thing in terms of their relationship in this episode. I wanted a little bit more context from them. So those would be my top 2 priorities in terms of adding some time in the episode. But there's so many other possibilities, and it was really interesting to discuss. People came up with so many different ideas, both fun and silly and serious, that ran the whole gamut. So it's a really fun exercise, and it might be something that I will continue to play with on this channel. So on that note, would love to hear from you, your thoughts in the comments. What kinds of things would you add? So in the first episode, for instance, since that's where this deleted scene comes from, if you could add 5 minutes, what would you add? So if you are interested in checking out the programming at WoTCon, you can actually still buy a virtual membership and go back and watch all of the main sessions, all of the panels. You can go back and watch them online. Once you're a member, you can log in on the website and access all of that. So I highly recommend that you do that if you have any curiosity about so much great content. In terms of the panels, I tried to sort of have roughly 3 different, focuses. So there was always, a panel that was more focused on book material, always a panel that was more focused on show material. So those ones are the safer ones if you have not finished reading the books. Some of the book focused topics might also be okay for you depending on how much you've read. And we try to discuss that up front. And then there would be like a wild card one too. So just something kind of fun and creative and audience interactive and things like that. So I was very happy with the way things turned out. And I'm really excited even just to be thinking about next year and what we want to do for it. But the best thing overall, and what I definitely will take away, is just all of the people that I met. Everybody, whether it was someone that I was familiar with because they're also creating content for the Wheel of Time, or people I've gotten to know on Twitter or on Discord, or in some cases people I had no familiarity with at all whatsoever before. It was just really great to be able to just have a conversation with anyone that you come across, and then also to put faces and that kind of just hanging out and having fun with someone that you feel like you feel like you're sort of been friends with this person, but you've never actually met them. That's just a really, really cool experience. So I was thrilled to have gotten the opportunity to do that. Can't wait to do more. And even just getting to participate or watch live what some of the other creators are doing. I got to be a part of the live show for Threefold Talk and do a little fun water challenge against Omar from WoTSeries.com. And hey, I'm now an honorary IEL, if you can believe that. And then getting to watch the Black Tower guys in their podcast live. Oh my God, one of the funniest experiences I've ever had. So you definitely want to check them out. I'm actually going to be on their show coming up soon talking about WoTCon there too. So look for that. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, there was a second deleted scene that was also released at WoTCon. As of the time when I'm filming this, that has not been released to the public yet. So I'm not going to do any sort of, detailed discussion of that yet. I'll wait on that one, but I'll just mention because, it's out there so people know what it's about. The scene was a scene between Tam and Egwene. A little bit of an extended scene from the shorter one that we do see from between them in the episode, with some pretty interesting discussion in regards to, Egwene is at a point where she has to sort of make a decision, right? Is she going to become Nynaeve's apprentice? And it definitely has a bearing on that. So I look forward to talking about that and any other deleted scenes that we might get if we are so lucky. But overall, just, seeing deleted scenes, doing the exercise at WoTCon of thinking about what you could do with 5 more minutes of time, it sort of made me really realize that I don't think it ever is very likely for Wheel of Time to get more than 8 episodes per season. I think that is a huge stretch and one that is just not likely to happen and not necessarily in the best interest of the show either. As much as we all want, as much as we can get, if you think about how much time needs to go into making all of these episodes, as we are right now, we're looking at more than a year between the first season and the second season. I hope that they'll be able to get on a kind of consistent schedule if the show is successful to where the seasons are about a year apart. But if you were to try to add in, let's say, 2 more episodes in that, forget it. It just doesn't seem possible. And I think the longer the gap between seasons, the harder it is to finish this series. And so I really feel pretty strongly in thinking about it that if Amazon would get to the point where they are willing to be a little bit more flexible on the run times, being able to add just a few more minutes or so in each episode could do a lot and would really give them so much more to work with and so much more flexibility on these episodes. So that's the angle that I am hoping that we go, rather than hoping for something that isn't realistic and might not even be that great for the show in the long run of more episodes. I'm hoping for the ability to do longer episodes as needed. And if the show has that audience that they've built in and captured, I'm hoping that Amazon will see the benefit of that. So as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this scene and anything else that I've discussed here in the comments. And be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss my future Wheel of Time content. I always have ideas running around in my head, and I will do my best to bring them to you as quickly as I can. I always appreciate hearing from you. So you came in peace, now depart in peace.